In this video lecture, we're going to discuss the psychology of everyday actions. In other words, we're going to talk about Chapter 2 of The Design of Everyday Things by Don Norman. What is Chapter 2 about? Briefly, it's about how people interact with objects. Accordingly, we're going to talk about some of the important ideas that go into how people interact with objects. Specifically, the 2 gulfs to cross, the 7 stages of crossing those gulfs, the 2 sequences people use moving through those stages, and 3 different levels of processing. Norman's basic model, we're going to use this old school typewriter as an illustration for how it works. Here's his model in simplified format. There are 4 things you need to pay attention to here. In particular, goal. That is our big idea of what do we want to happen. So for example, this old school typewriter, I want to put words on the page. So that is my goal. I then need to find out the world. The world is the result of some sort of action, or it is also the pre-existing state that you want to change. So the world is what we live in. It is the thing that is impinging on you, your senses. This is what is giving you We'll talk more about this as it goes along and make more sense, but the big idea here is that we are embedded in the world and we get feedback, sensory feedback from the world. Then, here are the really important vocab pieces. Gulf of execution. The gulf of execution is the gap between the goal and the world. So, this old school typewriter, my goal is I'm going to use it and put words on a page. So, how do I work this machine? What can I actually do with the machine? Is it possible to put the words on the page? If so, what kind of words, what will they look like? Are they the kind of words that I want? So we have the gap between I want and the end result. Then on the other side, the gulf of evaluation is the gap between the real world and our goal state. So is this thing what I wanted to happen? Once I've used the machine, did I get what I wanted? Or when I actually used the machine, what was it that happened? So these 2 pieces of vocab, gulf of execution, gulf of evaluation, they're the most important ones you really need to know on this slide. Make sure you write them down, make sure you pay attention to them, make sure you study them. You will need them in the future. So to bridge the gulf of execution and the gulf of evaluation, people need to follow a 7-stage sequence. I'm going to give you a bulleted list here. This is not a numbered list. This is a bulleted list. It is based on this representation of the model, and this one's broken down in a little more detail. We're going to talk about each of these words, and please take notes so you know what each of these words means. To begin with, we've got goal. Goal is what we want to happen. So to get across the gulf of execution, you've got to form a goal. What do I want to happen? You then need to plan some sort of action sequence. What is it that I need to do? Do I need to push the button? If so, what exactly, how's this going to work? What am I going to do? You then need to specify the action sequence. It's not enough to just say, I want to make the machine work. It's going to be, okay, I need to make the machine work. In what sequence of buttons do I need to push? Do I need to push the button, then pull the lever, or do I need to pull the lever and then push the button? If you start doing it randomly, it's no good. You got to plan your actions. After you've specified the action sequence, you're going to perform those actions, whatever they may be. I'm going to push the button. I'm going to pull the lever. I'm going to write a letter to my congressman. I'm going to, whatever it may be. I need to ask mom. Whatever. Point is, performing the actions is the last step from getting from the goal state to changing the world. Then, going the other way around, the bridge of evaluation, we perceive the state of the world. Remember, the world is the thing in which we are embedded. It's the thing that is providing sensory input to us. So we are perceiving input from the world. We are then interpreting those perceptions. So, there's something pressing on me. It is sharp. It is pointy. It hurts. I'm interpreting then that perception. I don't think I like this. I compare it to the goal state. Did I want something sharp, heavy, pointing, poking into me and making me hurt? If so, yes, excellent. If not, oh, this is bad. So the point is, to get across the bridge of evaluation, you need to perceive what the world is like, interpret that input, and then compare it to your intended goal state. Remember, write all these words down. You will need them, and you will need to understand what they are, what they mean. When we look at this model, there are two different ways we can go about using it. We can start off from a mental goal. This is called a goal-driven behavior. So I want to buy a concert ticket, and I want to go to the Sepultura show. Okay, great. How am I going to get there? I need to plan what I want to do. I need to specify how I'm going to do it. I need to perform it. We can also start the other way around. We can start from an event in the world, and this is called data or event-driven behavior. So, I'm walking along. I perceive an advertisement. It says, Sepultura is coming to town. I interpret that. Sepultura. Oh, yes. Oh, they're coming to town. This is exciting. I compare it to my goal state of, am I there at the concert? No, I'm not. Perhaps I should buy a ticket. So we can go around this in two different ways. So I'll illustrate here. We'll start with goal-driven behavior. If we do this, we start at the goal, work around to the comparison. So goal, plan, specify, perform, perceive, interpret, compare. Boom, 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 move in this sequence. We can also then start from an event in the world and go all the way around. So as I've already said before, my goal is I want to go to the concert. I'm going to need to buy a ticket. How am I going to do that? I'm going to go to Ticketmaster and I'm going to search and I'm going to order it. Then I perform. I perceive the input. Let's see. I got an email from Ticketmaster and my credit card was charged. Interpret. That seems to mean that I was successful in buying a ticket. Compare. Is that what I wanted? Yes. No. Yes, it is. Hey, I've got a ticket. Cool, fine, fantastic. When they come to town, well, when they were going to come to town, everything's postponed because of COVID-19, but I had a ticket. This was cool. Then if we go the other way around, starting with the data or event-driven behavior, in the world, gee, I wonder what's going on in the music world today. I perceive the advertisement. They're coming to town. I interpret that. That sounds really fun. Compare. Wow, I'm kind of bummed right now because I'm not at the show. I'll form a goal. I will go to the show. I will plan then I must buy a ticket. I will specify how am I going to buy that ticket? I'm going to go to Ticketmaster and click on the buttons. I will search and pay my money. I perform those actions. I get results into the world, emails, debits on my accounts. I perceive those emails. I perceive those debits. I interpret those as success. I compare that to my intended goal state. Yes, I am going to go to the show. Or again, until COVID hit, I was going to go to the show. Point is, we can start either way around, either at a goal-driven behavior or a data or event-driven behavior. Follow these same steps all the way through. That's why I gave you a bulleted list and not a numbered list, because if I started just at one and moved around, the numbers would move. So point is, they do need to appear in the same sequence, just where you start can change. We've talked about these various sequences. Now let's talk about how your brain works. There are three different levels of processing, cognition, and emotion that Norman discusses. There are the visceral, behavioral, and reflective levels. Let's define each of these in turn. To begin, visceral. Viscera are your body organs. In other words, it's your guts. Therefore, a visceral reaction is a gut response. This comes from deep inside your brain. So we've got different levels of brain, if you would, way down inside your reptilian brain. This is the thing that just makes you breathe. If you get poked, you twitch. If you feel hungry, this is where it's coming from. All right? These are basic things that keep you alive. Then the next level up in the brain is the limbic brain. It's your emotional or feeling. This is where it's not really thinking about, you just sort of react. Then The top part, the outer layer, the cortex and neocortex, that's your rational or thinking brain. So this is where all of what makes us really human goes on. This is where our real thinking, quote unquote, happens. So when we talk about a visceral response, this is happening down inside your limbic brain, approaching the reptilian brain. So for example, hey kid, what is your first reaction to this? Odds are you're going to say, ugh, come on kid, get your finger out of your nose. What's wrong with you? Where does that come from? Did you think about it at first? And did you just have to think, that child has his finger up his nose. That is socially unacceptable and it's kind of disgusting as well. Okay, ew, I don't like that. No. Odds are you just looked at it and said, come on, kid. So what's happening here is this is not a thinking reaction. This is a gut reaction. The next level, we have behavioral. Behavioral is where learning comes in. So I put a picture of the keyboard up here because when you see a keyboard like this, you have usually learned how to use it, right? Now, if you've taken keyboarding or, as if I'm showing my age, typing, I actually learned how to use a thing like this on a IBM Selectric 2 with a daisy head print wheel, and I tapped, thunk, 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 and it, made real impressions on a piece of paper. So when I talk about learning here, every action that you perform has got to link up with some sort of expectation of what happens. You don't just do things and see what happens unless you are literally a baby, because that's how babies explore the world. They do things, they find what happens, and they make connections between the two. The thing is, feedback is essential. If you don't get any feedback, if you act and nothing happens, or if worse yet, your user acts and you have not provided them with any feedback in the system, that means they will not know what's going on, they will not be able to learn what's happening, and the system will have failed. So I'm going to talk a little bit, well actually I'm not going to talk, I'm going to show a video here. This is a little video about classical and operant conditioning. If you have taken a psychology class, you should be, well, if you've taken psychology of learning, you'll learn about this, but consider this a crash course. It's a very short video we're going to watch.
When we think about learning, we often picture students in a classroom or lecture hall, books open on their desk, listening intently to a teacher or professor in the front of the room. But in psychology, learning means something else. To psychologists, learning is a long-term change in behavior that's based on experience. Two of the main types of learning are called classical conditioning and operant, or instrumental conditioning. Let's talk about classical conditioning first. In the 1890s, a Russian physiologist named Ivan Pavlov did some really famous experiments on dogs. He showed dogs some food and rang a bell at the same time. After a while, the dogs would associate the bell with the food. They would learn that when they heard the bell, they would get fed. Eventually, just ringing the bell made the dog salivate. They learned to expect food at the sound of the bell. You see, under normal conditions, the sight and smell of food causes a dog to salivate. We call the food an unconditioned stimulus, and we call salivation an unconditioned response. Nobody trains a dog to salivate over some steak. However, when we pair an unconditioned stimulus like food with something that was previously neutral, like the sound of a bell, that neutral stimulus becomes a conditioned stimulus. And so classical conditioning was discovered. We see how this works with animals, but how does it work with humans? In exactly the same way. Let's say that one day you go to the doctor to get a shot. She says, "Don't worry, this won't hurt a bit," and then gives you the most painful shot you've ever had. A few weeks later, you go to the dentist for a checkup. He starts to put a mirror in your mouth to examine your teeth, and he says, "Don't worry, this won't hurt a bit." Even though you know the mirror won't hurt, you jump out of the chair and run screaming from the room. When you went to get a shot, the words, "this won't hurt a bit," became a conditioned stimulus when they were paired with the pain of the shot, the unconditioned stimulus, which was followed by your conditioned response of getting the heck out of there. classical conditioning in action. Operant conditioning explains how consequences lead to changes in voluntary behavior. So how does operant conditioning work? There are two main components in operant conditioning, reinforcement and punishment. Reinforcers make it more likely that you'll do something again, while punishers make it less likely. Reinforcement and punishment can be positive or negative, but this doesn't mean good and bad. Positive means the addition of a stimulus, like getting dessert after you finish your veggies, and negative means the removal of a stimulus, like getting a night of no homework because you did well on an exam. Let's look at an example of operant conditioning. After eating dinner with your family, you clear the table and wash the dishes. When you're done, your mom gives you a big hug and says, "Thank you for helping me." In this situation, your mom's response is positive reinforcement if it makes you more likely to repeat the operant response, which is to clear the table and wash the dishes. Operant conditioning is everywhere in our daily lives. There aren't many things we do that haven't been influenced at some point by operant conditioning. We even see operant conditioning in some extraordinary situations. One group of scientists showed the power of operant conditioning by teaching pigeons to be art connoisseurs. Using food as a positive reinforcer, scientists have taught pigeons to select paintings by Monet over those by Picasso. When showed works of other artists, scientists observed stimulus generalization as the pigeons chose the Impressionists over the Cubists. Maybe next they'll condition the pigeons to paint their own masterpieces.
Okay, so as we see here, behavior is something that is learned. It is not just random actions, but when you have people do things, you have to provide some kind of feedback so they can work off of that feedback and figure out, is it working? Is it not working? Give them something that they can hang their hats on, so to speak. Let's see here. Need to click physically. There we go. Next up, we've got reflective processing. So reflective processing is active thinking. It's up in the cortex. The person here, she is figuring out, why did that happen? And the next time I use this thing, I think blank is going to happen. So if we go back and think about that funky looking typewriter we had at the beginning of the slideshow, well, when she put her hands on it and started moving her fingers and punch, 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 various strange and weird things happened. What's going to happen the next time I do that? Maybe the same thing. Is that what I wanted? Perhaps I should use it a different way. So you notice she is not only thinking now, is that what I got? She is forming that loop again. So she forms a goal. I want to put words on the page. I'm planning action. I'm going to punch these buttons. Specify the action sequence. I'm going to punch the buttons A, B, C, D. She performs those actions. She perceives. Did she get A, B, C, D? She's interpreting that the shapes on the page are not the A, B, C, D, comparing it to a goal. She wanted A, B, C, D. Perhaps she should put her fingers on a different keys and try pushing different keys instead. So that is her goal. She's planning her action. She's specifying the action sequence, and then she presses those different keys again. So she can go around and around and around this circle of crossing the gulfs of evaluation and the gulf of execution multiple times until she gets where she needs to go. So, visceral, behavioral, and reflective processing, guess what? Good design needs all three of those. There's a very famous book called Don't Make Me Think by Steve Krug. He is a web guy. He does in particular usability. And so his big idea here in this book is that you've got to provide feedback and stimuli and cues for your users so that they don't need to think. They can just look at something, look at your website that you've created, look at your interface, and think, oh yeah, this is great. Then when they behave, touch the buttons, click the things, they get the feedback. They don't need to employ that reflective part of their brain so much, but if they do start to need to think about what is it I need to do next, they can puzzle their way through really easily without expending any brain power. So, good design, whether you are a technical communicator or an interactive designer, you need to consider all three of these and how is your design that you are creating helping your reader or your user by employing visceral, behavioral, and reflective processing. So when we look at the model we talked about before, let's link it up with how these levels work. So the reflective goes with the plan and compare levels, the behavioral is the specify and interpret levels, and the visceral is perform and perceive levels. There are specific questions that are also associated with each of these stages. So in terms of planning, what are my alternatives? Specifying, what is it that I can do here? What are my options? Performing, how do I actually go about doing this sequence? Then, coming around the other way, the feedback we're giving, we're going to perceive what happened. We will interpret what the results are, what does it actually mean, and then compare it to the outcome. Is this okay? Is this what I wanted? And that is chapter 2. So just to recap everything we've talked about so far, we've defined the gulfs of execution and the gulf of evaluation. We've talked about and defined the 7 stages of bridging the gulfs: goal, plan, specify, perform, perceive, interpret, compare. We have talked about goal-driven behavior, where it starts. We have talked about data or event-driven behavior, how it starts and how its sequence goes. And we've talked about the 3 different levels of processing: the visceral, behavioral, and reflective processing that are necessary. That is what we have for chapter 2. So thank you for watching, and that is the end of the PowerPoint.